So what we have here today is the most powerful Mini ITX build that I've ever put together. And this is actually a personal build for myself to improve my overall workflow with video editing and occasional gaming. The goal with this project was to use the most highest performing parts, the most flagship components, and to compress all of that into this tiny little case, the Phanteks Evolv Shift XT. To do a quick run through of the main components, we are running a Core i9 14900K, 96GB of DDR5 RAM, a 4TB NVMe SSD that is also Gen 5, along with a Founders Edition RTX 4090. But this thing is an absolute beast that can handle pretty much anything possible. And probably my most favorite part of all is how subtle this build looks. You know, it doesn't stand out, it doesn't look crazy. I don't know if you can call it a sleeper, so to speak, but for the most part, it just looks like a very simple and clean PC, yet it packs a huge performance punch. Now in this video, we're gonna be going through the entire build, going through every single step along the way. But before we get to that, make sure to drop a like and a comment on this video to boost the algorithm. And if you are new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well as turning on the post notifications to see when I upload. So with that being said, sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and enjoy the entire build. Alrighty guys, so we're gonna start this build off with the motherboard. This is the ASUS ROG, or Republic of Gamers, Strix Z790i, which is a Mini ITX motherboard. We're doing a mini build today, but the reason why I opted for this motherboard is because it is compatible with PCI Gen 5, and we're going to be using a very high-powered SSD in this build, and so we needed something that can support that. And inside the box, we have the motherboard right smack in the center, and wow, it is tiny. It has really big heat sinks over here, which is good for cooling. Also, the actual SSD over here, the housing over here, is quite brolic of a cooler. At some point, I do plan on changing this out. Under the box, we have a whole bunch of accessories in here. Okay, so this is actually a multimedia interface for your USB-C, headphone, microphone. We have a couple more boxes within boxes. A lot of packaging in here, I gotta say. So it looks like this is an adapter where you can connect more USB 3.0 or 2.0 ports, along with some SATA cables and whatnot. And wow, we have a whole bunch more stuff. We have some SATA cables. We got some zip ties, and we have a Wi-Fi adapter. We have a couple more accessories in here. We have motherboard standoffs. We have a nice keychain, Republic of Gamers from ASUS. This seems to be a sheet of stickers, which is really cool to customize your case if you wanna, use that. So now it is time to install our CPU, and our processor of choice is the Intel Core i9 14900K, which is the most powerful yet in this generation, besides the 14900KS. But this is a little bit more, user-friendly, so to speak. And I did get this pre-owned, so hopefully this thing is not broken. Check that out. Oof, what a beautiful, beautiful chip, I gotta say. So first things first, we're gonna remove this plastic cover over here. And then we're gonna lift this bracket arm, which has a piece of plastic on it as well, which we'll remove. And this bracket should open up towards us. If I can figure it out. Yep, here we go. And we're gonna take our i9 and make sure you line it up correctly. Text should be facing you. That's kind of how you can orient it. And it should just plop right into the slot. Just like so. Close down the bracket and lock it into place. Ugh, 2 tries. We got it though. Next up, we have the RAM. So we are running a 98GB kit, 2x48 gigs of DDR5. This is a CL46 kit running at 5600 megahertz. So pretty overkill, I gotta say. We're just gonna cut this open real quick. And this motherboard only has slots for 2 sticks anyway, and that's usually the case with most Mini ITX boards. Here's a nice close-up look of it. It looks very sleek, very minimal, all sort of matte black DDR5 Pro. So we're gonna go ahead and put it into the RAM slots. We're gonna open down the brackets. It only opens on one side. And we'll line it up to the correct orientation. Line it up correctly, and then we're gonna give it a nice little push until it snaps into place. That's how you know it's nice and secure, just like that. So now, we have the RAM and the CPU installed in here. The last thing to install into the motherboard is the SSD. First things first, we're gonna go ahead and actually remove this cover over here. Alrighty. And what's nice is it actually comes with a pre-applied thermal pad on here. And it also has the motherboard standoff on here ready for the SSD, which is really, really handy. Now in this motherboard, you can actually fit a couple of the M.2 SSDs in here, which is really convenient, but only one of them is compatible with PCI Gen 5. For our SSD, we are using the world's fastest crucial T705. This is a 4 terabyte configuration, so you get the maximum size for capacity and the highest read and write speeds. So this thing is gonna be an absolute beast. And then you can insert your SSD at a 45-degree angle into the slot. So here's a better view of the SSD being installed in here. Now this actual riser does not seem to fit with this groove here, but it seems like it's gonna be okay if we sandwich it down with the heatsink. I did actually remove it so I can take a look underneath here to expose the original PCI Gen 4 slot if you want to add in a second drive in here. We're now gonna take this upper heat shield and also peel back that protective layer. And we're gonna sandwich this together so we can get the maximum cooling effect. And this bolt over here does line up with this riser. So technically you don't need to actually screw in the SSD to that part. It might vary case to case, but for this case specifically, it seems like they all kind of go together in a very effective sandwiching way. Now I did notice I ran into a bit of a clearance issue here, so I do have to take this heatsink off because to mount it back on, I do have to have this heatsink exposed. And we're gonna put this back into the motherboard. That way we can tighten down the other bolts holding down this bracket into place. Now the heatsink can go back on top. Then we can go ahead and tighten down all the bolts. So here we have the completed motherboard setup. We have the i9 installed, the 98 gigabytes of RAM, as well as our SSD. So inside of the box, we are greeted with a nice accessory kit. And here we have the case, nicely secured. And we have some, what seems to be magnetic or adhesive shrouds over here for blocking out any dirt and grime. Now let's take a look at the actual case. So based on how it looks right now, it seems to be folded down in its smallest configuration. Our plan here is to actually unfold it and make it into the largest size possible for this build. It kind of reminds me of the cheese grater look of the Mac Pros in a very silvery finish, and that is the color that I opted for. They do have a black version as well. I just wanted to get something that looks a little more classy. So we're just gonna go ahead and start taking everything apart to make room so we can start building inside of here. Alrighty, so we have taken everything apart on the case, so we have more room to work with, including this, what seems to be a SATA SSD enclosure or a bracket, which I won't be using. So for the most part, it looks like a pretty simple layout. This looks like where the GPU will be sitting with the 3-card slot on the back here. This is a PCI riser that will be connected to the motherboard on the other side, right over here. This is where the motherboard will most likely sit. Power supply and the cooler and all that AIO stuff will kind of loop through here. And this is all of the front panel connectors, which are nicely organized and laid out for you. So we're actually gonna go ahead and move the case aside and start preparing our cooler. Alrighty, so this is the cooler that we're using. This is from MSI, the Coreliquid E240. What we're mainly looking for is just the bracket. We're not gonna set this up just yet. So since we are using Intel, we should be looking for an Intel bracket. Looks like everything should be inside of here. All right, here we go. The 1700, this is for the Intel. So we're gonna go ahead and peel off the 3M adhesive on the backside first. Alrighty, and just line it up with the backside of the motherboard, making sure it's in the correct orientation. Just like that. And just adding a little bit of pressure so it can really secure in there. Alrighty, now we can bring the case back and start installing this motherboard in here. So let's just slide it right into place, like so. Just like that. And we're gonna go ahead and use the provided screws from the actual case to hold down the motherboard. So So now that we have the screws installed, we're gonna go ahead and install the PCI riser since it's right over here. We're gonna first peel back this protective cover and get rid of that first. Alrighty, make sure this bracket is down and it should snap in place. Just like so. Let's see, the USB 3.0. I think this one should go right over here. Bang. Then we're gonna do the USB-C right next to it. Bang. We're gonna put away the SATA cable for the time being because we don't need that right now. So interesting enough, this motherboard actually has an external expansion card for the front panel connector, which kind of makes sense with this being so tiny. So the pins over here on this piece is for the front panel connector. So we're gonna take that, or take this, which is the front I/O, and just connect it on here. And just like that, we have all these other cables now for the power LED, reset switch, HDD, power port. So now we can take the power cable supplied from the case and connect it to these pins. And now this chip over here has two USB-C ports which align with two USB-C ports on the motherboard. So a very interesting design. I haven't seen anything like it before, I gotta say. But it does allow things to be very compact. Definitely a little strange for it to be coming out in this sort of configuration. Alrighty, so now it is time to install our GPU. So we're gonna open up these 3 card slots. And here we have our very brolic RTX 4090 Founders Edition card. Clearance, I believe, is about 324 millimeters, and this should be about 305 or 304-ish. So it should just make it. Let's just slot it in place, nice and carefully. Bang! Wow, look at that, guys. This thing is enormous in here. There's about a little bit less than an inch of room over here, which is fine. At least it's not touching. So we're gonna go ahead and tighten down the side bolts. So next up, we're gonna start doing our power supply. We're gonna do the AIO last, just because that's the more outer part. That's the part that kind of closes down on everything. Alrighty, so the power supply that we're using today is a Corsair SF1000L. It's an SFX-L, so it's a mini power supply that also is slightly longer on one side. And it is a refurb unit, so that's why it comes in a brown box. Nice and tiny, very compact looking. It's actually a lot smaller than I thought. And the reason why I opted for this model specifically is because it comes with a native cable here for the RTX 4090. It has a PCIe 16 pin here, and it splits off into 2 8 pins, so it should supply enough power. And we're gonna take the power supply and we want the ports facing inward while the actual power plug is facing outward. And all the screw holes line up really, really well, so fitment is perfect. You do kind of have to hold it in place because this little ledge here is a little bit low or a little short. And there is a power cord that is coming out from the case, which is pretty much just rerouting where the power cord will be when the build is complete. So this will go right into the power supply, right on the bottom here. So we're gonna plug that in. First off, we're gonna start with the motherboard power cable. And you just wanna make sure every connection is nice and snug. This is probably the hardest part about doing Mini ITX builds, is the lack of clearance. And so you always have to kind of play around with trying to make things fit. So for example, I'm gonna have to unplug some of these connections here just to make a little bit of space. Now, of course, we can't just have this dangling over here. We gotta tuck it away because once the panels go on, it's not gonna compress. Next up, we have our CPU power, which is an 8 pin that goes right on top of here. Alrighty, so the port is right over here on top of the GPU. So we're gonna plug that in first. And lastly, we need power to go into SATA cables for all of our accessories like the RGBs and the AIOs and whatnot. So I'll just prepare that right over here, and then we can move on to installing the AIO. Alrighty, so the way we plan to do the cooling in this build is where we want the air to actually pull out of the case. Instead of bringing intake, we're gonna run an exhaust setup. We want the air to go like this, to push this way out of the case. I'm actually gonna go ahead and remove the bracket from the case completely so we have a little bit more clearance to work with. So a little bit something like that is what we're imagining here. We're gonna have to loop this through, like so. Alrighty. So first things first, we're gonna go ahead and install these little risers for the AIO onto the motherboard standoffs. And you don't have to over tighten them, just wanna make sure they're nice and snug by hand. And now we're gonna use the provided Intel brackets right over here for the actual pump itself. So these just slide into place like so on each side, and you should be able to screw it in from the top. And what's nice about the provided screws is that there's a little bit of Loctite on here, so it's not gonna slip. Just keeps it nice and tight. Alrighty, and now we can install the thermal paste, which we're gonna be using the included one from MSI. I'm pretty sure this is just a very basic one, nothing crazy. I would probably wanna upgrade to something a little bit nicer in the future. So we're gonna just add a little pea-sized dot in the middle. Line up the bracket with the spacers that we installed earlier. You wanna go at a crosswise pattern, so you apply even pressure. And now we can go ahead and just finish up and button up all the little cables that we have hanging out, such as the fans and whatnot. Same thing with the AIO pump. So we're gonna just plug all these little things in, and then we can start buttoning up all the cable management, and hopefully we should be done from there. So here we have the final build, and I gotta say that I'm really impressed with how well this thing performs. Everything about this PC is extremely fluid and super fast. The startup times are just ungodly. It just starts up within 5 seconds. I can open up every single program possible that I ever installed on here, and it just runs it all like it's no one's business. Now, I'm not necessarily a big gamer, but when I did test some games on here, I can run pretty much everything at 4K on ultra settings. My main focus with this build was to use it for video editing, and with the i9 being a very smart and powerful chip, the encoding capabilities are just insane. I typically edit H.265 footage, also C-Log stuff, so a lot of color grading, a lot of processing, and it doesn't lag, it doesn't have any delays, it's super instant, and even the render times are just incredibly quick. Overall, this PC has really improved my overall workflow. It just made everything so much quicker, and I can just do bulk edits on multiple channels. I also did want to address one of the concerns that I've had because this is a very tiny build with very high-end components. Heat is definitely an issue. It's actually been a very common complaint with this specific case being kind of lacking in the cooling department, but I have made some upgrades and modifications to the build, which has greatly improved the cooling performance, which I will be making a separate video kind of going through the changes that I've made. So to wrap up this video, if you guys want to check out all the parts, it will also be in the description below if you want to replicate this build. But with that being said, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.